Lunch trays crashed to the linoleum floor as Karen Whitfield wrestled 12-year-old Emma Martinez onto the cafeteria ground. The metallic clatter echoing through Jefferson Middle School like gunshots. 200 students watched in stunned silence as the 43-year-old HOA enforcement officer pressed her knee into the girl's back, yanking her wrists behind her with practiced brutality. The silver handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that would haunt Emma's dreams for months to come. "Stop resisting," Karen barked, her voice cutting through the cafeteria's sudden hush like a blade. "You think you can just push people around because you're bigger than them." Emma's face pressed against the cold floor, her cheek burning from the rough contact. She couldn't breathe properly, not just from the weight on her back, but from the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled an oncoming asthma attack. 15 minutes earlier, Emma had been standing in the lunch line with her best friends Maya and Jessica, discussing their upcoming science project on renewable energy. The cafeteria buzzed with typical Tuesday afternoon energy, the smell of pizza and chocolate milk mixing with the sound of hundreds of conversations. Emma had been looking forward to lunch all morning, not because she was particularly hungry, but because it was one of the few times during the school day when she felt genuinely relaxed and accepted. At 5 feet 2 inches and weighing nearly 200 pounds, Emma had learned to navigate the world carefully. Her obesity-related asthma made physical activity challenging, and years of subtle bullying had taught her to keep her head down and avoid drawing attention to herself. She was a straight-A student who loved reading fantasy novels and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. But those dreams felt increasingly distant as each school day brought new reminders of how different she was from her classmates. "Emma, did you finish the math homework?" Maya asked, adjusting her glasses as they shuffled forward in line. The cafeteria workers moved efficiently behind the counter, serving up portions of pizza, salad, and fruit cups to the steady stream of students. "Yeah. Problem 15 was tricky, though," Emma replied, unconsciously touching the inhaler in her pocket. It was a nervous habit she'd developed over the years, a constant reminder that she needed to be prepared for anything. "I can show you my work if you want." Jessica, a petite girl with curly red hair, grinned. "You're like a walking calculator. Emma, I don't know how you do it." The compliment made Emma smile, one of the genuine smiles that transformed her whole face and reminded anyone watching that beneath her quiet exterior lived a bright, kind soul. That's when Karen Whitfield entered the cafeteria, her steel-toed boots clicking against the floor with military precision. She wore her HOA enforcement uniform like armor, complete with a badge, radio, and enough authority complex to fuel a small dictatorship. Karen had been patrolling the school grounds as part of a new community partnership program, ostensibly to ensure student safety and maintain order. In reality, she viewed it as an opportunity to expand her sphere of influence beyond the confines of Meadowbrook Heights, the suburban development where she ruled with an iron fist, disguised as concern for property values. Karen's sharp eyes swept across the cafeteria, searching for violations, infractions, or any excuse to assert her authority. She thrived on confrontation, on the intoxicating rush of power that came from making others bend to her will. Her own childhood had been marked by powerlessness and neglect, experiences that had metastasized into a toxic need to control everything and everyone around her. She'd been married twice, both relationships ending when her partners grew tired of walking on eggshells around her unpredictable temper and impossible standards. Emma and her friends had reached the front of the line when Karen approached. They were chatting quietly, Maya showing Jessica a funny meme on her phone while Emma selected her lunch items. The moment was peaceful, ordinary, the kind of simple teenage interaction that should have passed without notice. But Karen saw something different. She saw an opportunity. "Excuse me." Karen's voice cut through their conversation like ice. "Did you just cut in front of these students?" She gestured toward a group of seventh graders who were still several places behind them in line. Kids who had arrived after Emma's group and were chatting amongst themselves. Completely unaware they were being used as pawns in Karen's power play. Emma looked up. Confused. "No, ma'am. We've been in line for about 10 minutes. Her voice was polite but puzzled. The response of someone who genuinely didn't understand why she was being questioned. Maya stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in. "We were here first. Emma was right behind me the whole time." Jessica nodded in agreement, but Karen's expression only hardened. She'd made her decision, and facts were merely obstacles to be overcome. "Don't lie to me," Karen snapped, her voice rising enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "I saw you push past those kids. You think you can use your size to intimidate other students? To just take whatever you want?" The accusation hung in the air like poison, seeping into the consciousness of everyone within earshot. The cafeteria began to quiet as students turned to watch the confrontation. Emma's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she maintained her composure. "I didn't push anyone. I would never do that." Her voice remained steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Despite the way her chest was beginning to tighten, with the familiar warning signs of an asthma attack. Karen stepped closer, invading Emma's personal space with calculated aggression. "Are you calling me a liar? Do you know who I am? I'm an enforcement officer with the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, and I've been deputized to maintain order in this school." The lie rolled off her tongue easily. Another tool in her arsenal of intimidation. Mrs. Patterson, one of the cafeteria workers, approached with concern etched across her weathered face. She'd worked at Jefferson Middle School for 15 years and had watched Emma grow from a shy sixth grader into the thoughtful young woman standing before them. "Officer, these girls have been in line since I started serving. There hasn't been any trouble." Karen whirled on Mrs. Patterson with venomous intensity. "Are you interfering with an official investigation? I don't need you to tell me what I saw with my own eyes." The cafeteria worker took a step back, intimidated by Karen's aggressive posture and raised voice. "This is a dangerous pattern of behavior," Karen continued, her voice carrying across the now silent cafeteria. "Using physical intimidation to get what you want, pushing around smaller students, showing complete disrespect for authority. You're a menace to this school environment." Each word was chosen for maximum impact, designed to humiliate and demoralize. Emma's breathing became shallow and rapid. The combination of stress, humiliation, and Karen's overwhelming presence was triggering her asthma. But she didn't want to reach for her inhaler in front of all these people. She'd learned that showing weakness often invited more cruelty, and she was already vulnerable enough. "Please, I just want to get my lunch and sit down." "Oh, you want to just walk away?" Karen's voice dripped with mock surprise. "You think you can bully other students and then just pretend nothing happened? I don't think so." She grabbed Emma's arm with unnecessary force, her fingers digging into the soft flesh above the girl's elbow. "Let go of me." Emma's voice cracked with desperation and the beginnings of real fear. She tried to pull away, but Karen's grip tightened like a vice. The physical contact was the final straw for Emma's already compromised respiratory system, and she began to wheeze audibly. Mr. Rodriguez, the assistant principal, emerged from his office at the sound of raised voices. He was a kind man in his 50s who genuinely cared about his students' well-being, but he was also conflict-averse and intimidated by authority figures. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "This student has been disrupting the lunch line, using her size to intimidate other children, and now she's being disrespectful to school officials." Karen announced loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "I'm taking her to the principal's office for disciplinary action." Emma's wheezing was becoming more pronounced. and she reached for her inhaler with her free hand. Karen saw the movement and immediately interpreted it as defiance. "Put that down. You're not having some kind of medical episode to get out of consequences." She knocked the inhaler from Emma's hand, sending it skittering across the cafeteria floor. The moment the inhaler hit the ground, Emma's world began to collapse. The familiar blue device that represented safety and breath and life lay out of reach while her lungs fought for air. Panic set in alongside the physical symptoms, creating a feedback loop that made everything worse. "I can't breathe," she gasped, but Karen either didn't hear or didn't care. "Stop the dramatics and come with me," Karen commanded, yanking Emma toward the cafeteria exit. But Emma's legs were shaking, whether from lack of oxygen or fear, and she stumbled. Karen interpreted this as resistance and decided to escalate the situation with the nuclear option she'd been itching to use since the confrontation began. "That's it. You're under citizen's arrest for assault, disturbing the peace, and resisting a lawful order." Karen forced Emma to the ground with practiced efficiency, her knee finding the girl's back as she produced a pair of handcuffs from her belt. The metal restraints clicked into place with finality that echoed through the stunned cafeteria. 200 students watched in horror as Emma's face pressed against the cold linoleum, her breath coming in shallow, desperate gasps. Maya screamed and tried to reach her friend, but Jessica held her back, both girls crying and shouting for help. "Mr. Rodriguez stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. "Someone needs to call her parents, Mrs." Patterson shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And get the nurse. This child can't breathe." But Karen's authority seemed to have paralyzed the adults in the room, creating a bubble of institutional intimidation that prevented anyone from taking decisive action. Emma's vision began to blur at the edges as her body fought for oxygen. The weight on her back made it impossible to expand her lungs properly, and the metal cuffs cut into her wrists. Through her panic, she could hear the voices of her classmates, some crying, others shouting, all of them shocked by the violence they were witnessing. She thought about her Aunt Sophia, the new principal who had started just 3 weeks ago, and who Emma had been careful not to mention to her classmates. She wished her aunt was here, wished anyone was here who could make this nightmare stop. But Sophia Harris was in her office at that exact moment, watching the entire incident unfold on her laptop screen through the cafeteria's security camera system. She had been reviewing the new security protocols when she noticed the commotion, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The woman terrorizing her niece was the same HOA officer who had been making her own life miserable for the past 6 months with frivolous complaints and harassment. Sophia had moved to Meadowbrook Heights after accepting the principal position at Jefferson Middle School, hoping for a fresh start after her divorce. She'd bought a modest townhouse in what she thought would be a quiet, family-friendly community. Instead, she'd found herself in Karen Whitfield's crosshairs almost immediately. Her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Her garden gnome violated the aesthetic guidelines. Her car was parked 6 inches too far from the curb. The harassment had been relentless and seemingly random until Sophia realized it was neither random nor really about HOA violations. Karen had somehow discovered that Sophia was Emma's aunt, and the targeting had intensified after Emma started 7th grade. Every interaction with the HOA officer had been laced with subtle threats and references to Emma's well-being. Sophia had been documenting everything, but she hadn't expected Karen to escalate to physical violence against a child. As she watched her niece struggle for breath on the cafeteria floor, Sophia's finger hovered over the record button on the security app. She had to capture this, had to preserve evidence of what was happening. The recording began just as Karen leaned down to Emma's ear, her voice low but still audible through the sensitive microphones. "This is what happens to people who don't know their place. Your family thinks they're special, but I run this community. Remember that." The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of months of calculated harassment and intimidation. Sophia erupted from her office like a force of nature, her heels clicking against the hallway floor as she raced toward the cafeteria. She burst through the doors with such force that they slammed against the walls, the sound cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. "What is happening here?" Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 20 years in education, someone who knew how to command attention and respect. Karen looked up from Emma's prone form, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion as she recognized the new principal. "Principal Harris, I've apprehended a student who was disrupting the cafeteria and assaulting other children. She resisted arrest and posed a threat to school safety." Her voice carried the practiced confidence of someone who had talked her way out of consequences many times before. Sophia knelt beside Emma, without taking her eyes off Karen. "Remove those handcuffs immediately. This child is having an asthma attack." Her voice was deadly calm, the kind of quiet fury that was far more intimidating than shouting. She spotted Emma's inhaler near the lunch line and gestured to Maya. "Bring me that inhaler, sweetheart." "I'm not removing anything until proper authorities arrive," Karen declared. But her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Something about Principal Harris's demeanor was throwing her off balance, and she couldn't quite figure out why. "This student has been reported for multiple infractions and—" "Remove the handcuffs now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for assault on a minor." Sophia's voice cut through Karen's prepared speech like a scalpel. "You have no authority in this school, and you certainly have no right to put your hands on a child." Maya pressed the inhaler into Sophia's hands, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't breathe, and that lady wouldn't let her use it. She said Emma was faking. The betrayal and confusion in the young girl's voice made Sophia's jaw clench with barely controlled rage. "The cuffs, Ms. Whitfield, now." Sophia's use of Karen's name sent a visible shock through the HOA officer system. The principal wasn't supposed to know who she was, wasn't supposed to have that kind of information. Karen's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble as she realized she'd miscalculated badly. Reluctantly, Karen unlocked the handcuffs, but she remained defiant. "You're making a mistake. Principal Harris, this student has a history of problematic behavior, and her family has been causing issues in the community. I was protecting the other children." Even as she spoke, Karen could see the weakness in her position, but she was too committed to the lie to abandon it now. Sophia helped Emma sit up slowly, supporting her back as the girl took desperate pulls from her inhaler. The medication began to work almost immediately, but the trauma of the experience was etched across Emma's face, in the form of red marks from the floor, tear tracks, and the hollow expression of someone whose sense of safety had been shattered. "Breathe slowly, sweetheart. You're safe now." "I want to call my mom," Emma whispered between breaths, her voice small and broken. Sophia's heart ached at the sound of her niece's defeated tone, but she also felt a fierce pride in Emma's resilience. The girl had endured public humiliation and a terrifying physical attack. Yet she was still trying to be polite, still trying to follow the rules. "Of course, honey. We'll call her right away." Sophia looked up at Mr. Rodriguez, who had been standing in shocked silence throughout the confrontation. "Please call Emma's mother immediately, and contact the police. I want a report filed about this incident." Karen's eyes widened at the mention of police involvement. "That's completely unnecessary. This was a simple disciplinary matter that got out of hand. I'm sure we can resolve this quietly, between professionals." Her voice took on a pleading quality that was vastly different from the aggressive authority she'd displayed minutes earlier. "Professionals don't handcuff children for imaginary infractions," Sophia replied coldly. Professionals don't deny medication to a child having an asthma attack. And professionals certainly don't use their position to target specific families for harassment. Each accusation hit Karen like a physical blow, but the last one made her face go pale. "I don't know what you're implying," Karen began, but Sophia cut her off with a gesture. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been harassing my family for months, and now you've escalated to physical violence against my niece." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Emma looked up at her aunt with surprise and gratitude, finally understanding why she had felt so protected in that moment. Karen's face cycled through several emotions as the full implications of her mistake became clear. The new principal she'd been so careful to avoid was Emma's aunt, which meant every interaction she'd had with the Harris family was now viewed through the lens of this public assault on a child. Her attempts to maintain plausible deniability had just crumbled completely. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen said desperately. "I was doing my job, protecting the students. If I'd known Emma was your niece, if you'd known, you would have what treated her like a human being instead of a target." Sophia's voice rose for the first time since entering the cafeteria. Every child in this school deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, not just the ones related to staff members. The cafeteria had remained dead silent throughout the confrontation, 200 students bearing witness to the dramatic reversal of power. Many had their phones out, recording the exchange, capturing Karen's humiliation for posterity. The same technology that had documented her abuse of Emma was now documenting her downfall. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later to find Emma sitting at a cafeteria table with her friends, still shaky, but breathing normally. Sophia had provided a detailed statement about the incident, backing up her account with security footage that showed the entire confrontation from multiple angles. Karen sat in the principal's office, no longer the aggressive authority figure who had terrorized a child, but a woman facing the consequences of her actions for the first time in years. "Ms. Whitfield, you're under arrest for assault of a minor, false imprisonment, and interfering with a medical emergency," Officer Martinez announced as he read Karen her rights. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that she was being handcuffed in the same building where she had handcuffed a 12-year-old girl less than an hour earlier. Emma's mother, Maria Martinez, arrived at the school in a state of barely controlled panic. She swept her daughter into a fierce hug, checking for injuries while simultaneously demanding answers from every adult in the room. When she learned what had happened, her reaction was swift and decisive. "I want to press charges, full charges, and I want that woman banned from this school permanently." The story spread through the community like wildfire. By evening, local news stations were reporting on the incident, and social media was buzzing with outrage. The security footage, released with Maria's permission, showed the full extent of Karen's aggression and Emma's helplessness. The image of a grown woman handcuffing a child on a cafeteria floor became a rallying cry for discussions about authority, bullying, and the protection of vulnerable students. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA moved quickly to distance itself from Karen's actions. An emergency board meeting was called for that Friday evening, just 2 days after the incident. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling into the parking lot and demanding answers. Karen's pattern of harassment and abuse of power had affected dozens of residents over the years, but fear of retaliation had kept most of them silent. Emma's ordeal had finally given them the courage to speak out. Sophia attended the meeting not as a school official, but as a resident and victim of Karen's harassment. She presented a timeline of incidents dating back 6 months, documenting the escalating pattern of targeting that had culminated in the assault on Emma. Her presentation was methodical, professional, and devastating in its thoroughness. This woman used her position to terrorize families and children. Sophia told the packed room. She turned our community into a police state where residents lived in fear of arbitrary enforcement and personal vendettas. The assault on my niece was not an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of unchecked power and a culture that enabled abuse. One by one, residents stood to share their own experiences with Karen's enforcement tactics. An elderly man described being fined for having his garbage can out 15 minutes early. A single mother tearfully recounted being cited for her children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A disabled veteran explained how Karen had repeatedly targeted his service dog for violations that didn't exist in the HOA bylaws. The HOA board voted unanimously to terminate Karen's contract and launch an investigation into her conduct. They also voted to implement new oversight procedures and to create a resident complaint process with external review. The changes came too late for Emma, and too late for the dozens of other residents who had suffered under Karen's reign of terror. But they represented a step toward healing and accountability. The school board meeting the following Tuesday was even more intense. News crews lined the parking lot as parents, students, and community members packed the auditorium. Emma sat in the front row with her mother and aunt, her presence a powerful reminder of why they were all there. The security footage played on the large screen, showing every moment of Karen's assault in stark detail. Board member after board member condemned the incident and praised Sophia's quick response. They announced new policies for outside security personnel and implemented additional training for staff on how to handle conflicts involving students. The district's superintendent personally apologized to Emma and her family, acknowledging that the school had failed to protect her when she needed it most. But the most powerful moment came when Emma herself stood to address the board. Her voice was steady, despite her nervousness, and her words carried the weight of experience beyond her 12 years. I want to make sure this never happens to another kid. Nobody should have to choose between breathing and avoiding trouble. Nobody should be handcuffed for trying to eat lunch with their friends. The applause that followed Emma's statement lasted for nearly 2 minutes, with many adults in the audience openly weeping at the poise and courage displayed by the young girl. Local news picked up her words, and clips of her statement went viral on social media, making Emma an unexpected spokesperson for children's rights and anti-bullying efforts. Karen's criminal case moved through the court system with unusual speed, partly due to the clear evidence and partly due to the public attention focused on the case. She was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 6 months in jail, followed by 2 years of probation and mandatory anger management counseling. The judge's statement during sentencing was particularly pointed, noting that adults in positions of authority have a special responsibility to protect children, not to terrorize them. Ms. Whitfield, you took what should have been an ordinary day at school and turned it into a nightmare for a child who was guilty of nothing more than standing in a lunch line. Judge Sarah Williamson said during the sentencing hearing, "Your actions were not just criminal. They were fundamentally cruel, and they have damaged not just one child, but an entire school community's sense of safety and trust." The civil lawsuit that Maria filed on Emma's behalf was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. But the money was less important than the public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and the commitment to policy changes that would prevent similar incidents. The settlement required Karen to issue a formal apology to Emma in front of the entire student body, a humiliating but necessary step in the accountability process. The apology assembly was held 6 weeks after the original incident. Karen stood at the podium in the school gymnasium, her orange jail uniform a stark contrast to the authority-projecting outfit she had worn during the assault. Her voice shook as she read the court-mandated statement, acknowledging her wrongdoing and expressing remorse for the trauma she had caused. "I abused my position of authority and caused serious harm to Emma Martinez, a student who deserved to feel safe and protected at school." Karen read from the prepared statement. My actions were wrong, criminal, and inexcusable. I take full responsibility for the pain I caused Emma, her family, and this school community. Emma sat with her classmates during the assembly, watching the woman who had terrorized her, now facing the consequences of her actions. There was no joy in the moment, no sense of triumph, just a quiet relief that justice had been served and that other children would be protected from similar experiences. The real victory wasn't Karen's humiliation, but the changes that had been implemented to ensure student safety and dignity. The incident's impact extended far beyond Jefferson Middle School and Meadowbrook Heights. Emma's story became a case study in educational conferences about authority abuse and student protection. The security footage was used in training programs for school administrators, showing them how quickly a situation could escalate when unchecked authority met vulnerable students. Emma herself became something of a reluctant activist, speaking at anti-bullying events and student safety conferences. Her message was always the same: every child deserves to feel safe at school, and adults have a responsibility to protect children, not to use their authority to harm them. Her poise and articulation impressed audiences, but those who knew her best understood that her strength came from necessity rather than natural inclination. The anniversary of the incident was marked by the unveiling of new anti-bullying policies district-wide, policies that Emma had helped draft. The Emma Martinez Student Protection Act required all school personnel to receive training on recognizing and preventing authority abuse, and it established clear protocols for outside security personnel working in schools. Emma turned the worst day of her life into something that will protect thousands of other children. Sophia said during the ceremony, unveiling the new policies. She faced down a bully with badges and handcuffs, and she won. Not just for herself, but for every child who deserves to eat lunch in peace. As Emma entered 8th grade the following fall, she carried with her the knowledge that she had survived something terrible and had used that experience to create positive change. Her asthma was better controlled now, thanks to a new treatment plan and the removal of stress-inducing authority figures from her environment. Her confidence had grown, not because of what she had endured, but because of how she had chosen to respond to it. Maya and Jessica remained her closest friends, their bond strengthened by the shared trauma and the way they had stood up for each other when it mattered most. The three girls often talked about their dreams for the future, plans that now seemed more achievable because Emma had learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. I still want to be a veterinarian, Emma told her friends during one of their lunch conversations, sitting in the same cafeteria where her life had changed forever. But maybe I'll also work with kids somehow. Show them that they can stand up to bullies, even the ones with badges. The cafeteria itself had been transformed in the months following the incident. New anti-bullying posters lined the walls, featuring messages of inclusion and respect. A mural painted by the art students depicted children of all sizes, colors, and abilities standing together, with Emma's favorite quote from Maya Angelou prominently featured, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Sophia continued as principal of Jefferson Middle School. Her leadership style forever changed by witnessing her niece's ordeal. She implemented regular listening sessions where students could voice concerns about safety and fairness, and she made sure that every child in the building knew they had an advocate in the principal's office. Her relationship with Emma deepened as well, moving beyond family ties to include mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting vulnerable students. The Meadowbrook Heights community slowly healed from the divisions that Karen's reign of terror had created. New HOA leadership focused on actual community building rather than punitive enforcement, organizing neighborhood events and creating support networks for families. The playground equipment that Karen had repeatedly cited for violations was upgraded with funds from the legal settlement, creating a space where children could play without fear of arbitrary enforcement. Karen herself served her full sentence and completed her probation requirements, but she never returned to any position of authority. The conviction made her unemployable in security or enforcement roles, and she eventually moved away from the community she had terrorized. Some residents occasionally wondered what had driven her to such extremes, but most were content to move forward without her destructive presence. Emma's story became a touchstone for discussions about power, abuse, and resilience. She received letters from children around the country who had faced similar situations, thanking her for speaking out and showing them that they weren't alone. Each letter reminded her that her ordeal had meaning beyond her personal experience, that her courage had created a ripple effect of positive change. On quiet evenings at home, Emma would sometimes touch the small scar on her wrist where the handcuffs had cut into her skin, a permanent reminder of the day her world changed. But rather than shame or trauma, the scar represented something else now the moment she learned that she was stronger than her circumstances, braver than her fears, and capable of turning even the worst experiences into forces for good. "You know what I learned that day in the cafeteria?" Emma asked her aunt during one of their regular dinner conversations. "I learned that bullies are really just scared people who never learned how to be brave. And I learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing anyway." Sophia smiled at her niece's wisdom, recognizing the depth of understanding that only comes from facing real adversity and choosing to grow from it rather than be diminished by it. "And what are you going to do with that knowledge?" she asked. Emma looked out the window at the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center, where children now played safely in the upgraded playground. "I'm going to make sure other kids know they're not alone when bad things happen. And I'm going to help create a world where nobody has to choose between breathing and standing up for themselves." The lunch trays had long since been cleaned up from that terrible day in the cafeteria, and the floor had been mopped countless times since Emma had lain there gasping for breath. But the impact of those few minutes continued to resonate through the halls of Jefferson Middle School, through the streets of Meadowbrook Heights, and through the lives of everyone who had witnessed or heard about a 12-year-old girl's refusal to let injustice have the final word. Emma Martinez had entered that cafeteria as a quiet, vulnerable student trying to avoid attention. She had left it as a symbol of resilience, a voice for the voiceless, and a reminder that even the smallest among us can create waves of change that reach far beyond what we can imagine. Her story became proof that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with armies or legislation, but with a single child's decision to stand up and say, "This is wrong, and it has to stop." And in the end, that was exactly what happened. It stopped. The fear stopped. The harassment stopped. The abuse of power stopped. And in its place grew something better, a community that protected its children, a school that valued every student, and a young woman who learned that she was capable of changing the world, one brave moment at a time.